The transport shuttle's engines whined as it settled onto Landing Bay 7 of Nexus Station, the sound echoing through the metal corridors like a dying scream. Sergeant Kai Reeves adjusted his tactical vest and checked his sidearm one final time. Steel gray eyes fixed on the bay doors as they hissed open. 23 years of military service had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing had prepared him for what emerged from that shuttle. She was smaller than he'd anticipated. The alien prisoner stepped down the ramp with her wrists bound. In neural-dampening shackles, her movements fluid despite the restraints. Two armed escorts flanked her, weapons drawn, but she paid them no attention. Her species, the Vileth, were known for their pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in certain light and the intricate silver markings that traced along their temples and jawlines. But this one was different. Where intelligence reports described savage features and predatory eyes, Kai saw something else entirely. Dignity. "That's her?" asked Lieutenant Torres, Kai's second-in-command, his voice barely concealing his disgust. "Doesn't look like much for someone who's supposedly butchered half our supply convoys." Kai didn't respond immediately, studying the prisoner as she was led through the detention center's main corridor. She moved with purpose, her gaze sweeping the facility with what appeared to be tactical assessment rather than fear. Her dark hair fell in waves to her shoulders, and those eyes, larger than human eyes with irises that shifted between deep violet and silver, never wavered from their forward focus. "Thessa Veltar," read Captain Morrison from his datapad as they entered the processing area. "Confirmed leader of the Crimson Tide Resistance Cell, responsible for 17 confirmed attacks on human Colonial Authority supply lines, estimated death toll of 437 personnel." He looked up at the prisoner with undisguised hatred. "She's scheduled for immediate enhanced interrogation, then execution within 72 hours. Thessa's expression didn't change at the mention of her impending death. If anything, Kai detected the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. Amusement? Relief? He couldn't tell. The processing took 40 minutes. Biometric scans, blood samples, neural pattern mapping, all standard procedure for high-value prisoners. Throughout it all, Thessa remained silent, complying with each request. Without resistance, but without submission. She was playing a longer game, Kai realized. But what game? As they led her to Cell Block D, the maximum security section reserved for the most dangerous criminals, Kai found himself walking beside her. This close, he could smell something like cinnamon and ozone radiating from her skin, and he noticed the way her breathing remained steady despite being surrounded by armed humans who considered her a monster. "Comfortable quarters," she said, suddenly her voice carrying a musical quality that universal translators couldn't quite capture. It was the first time she'd spoken since arriving. Kai glanced at her, surprised. Her English was flawless, though accented with something that reminded him of wind through canyon walls. "Standard detention protocol," he replied professionally. "Of course." Those violet eyes flicked to his face for just a moment. "And you are the one who will be asking me questions?" "That's the plan." She nodded once thoughtfully. "I see. And what will you ask me, Sergeant?" "Reeves. And I'll ask whatever command wants me to ask." Naturally, they'd reached her cell now, a 10 by 12 space with a basic cot, sanitation unit, and reinforced walls capable of containing a small explosion. As the guards activated the energy barriers, Thessa stepped inside and turned to face them. "But, perhaps, Sergeant Reeves, you might also ask what you want to know." The cell door sealed with a low hum of energy, but her words lingered in the corridor long after Kai and his team had left. Back in his quarters that night, he found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the prisoner's arrival. Command wanted answers about resistance operations, supply routes, hidden bases, but what Kai wanted to know was simpler and infinitely more complex. Who was she really? And why? When he looked into those strange, beautiful eyes, did he see not the gaze of a killer, but something that looked remarkably like hope? The chronometer on his desk ticked toward 0200 hours as Kai finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by the image of a woman who carried herself like royalty even in chains. and the growing certainty that everything they'd been told about her was a lie. The interrogation room felt smaller than usual when Kai entered at 800 hours, 2 cups of coffee in hand, a habit that had served him well over the years. Prisoners, he'd learned, often responded better to unexpected kindness than to threats. What he hadn't expected was to find Thessa sitting perfectly still, her bound hands folded in her lap, watching the door as if she'd been waiting specifically for him. "Good morning, Sergeant Reeves," she said, that musical accent making even formal greetings sound like poetry. "I wondered when you would come." Kai set 1 cup on the table and pushed it toward her. "Thought you might be thirsty." He settled into the chair across from her, noting how she regarded the coffee with curious eyes but made no move to touch it. "A kindness," she observed. "Are you hoping to lower my defenses? Are they up?" For the first time since her arrival, Thessa almost smiled. "Always, Sergeant, but perhaps not for the reasons you think." The next hour was unlike any interrogation Kai had ever conducted. Instead of demanding information about resistance operations, he found himself asking about her homeworld, her family, the war itself. And slowly, carefully, Thessa began to paint a picture that differed drastically from official reports. "You speak of the Crimson Tide as if it were a terrorist organization," she said, finally sipping the coffee and nodding appreciatively. "But tell me, what would you call a group of people fighting to protect their children from being relocated to work camps?" Kai's jaw tightened. The reports had mentioned labor reassignment programs, but nothing about children. "The Colonial Authority maintains strict protocols." "The Colonial Authority," Thessa interrupted gently, "maintains many things, Sergeant. Truth is not always among them." Over the following days, their sessions became less interrogation and more conversation. Kai found himself looking forward to these meetings, drawn not just by the mystery surrounding her case, but by Thessa herself. She was brilliant, passionate about her people's welfare, and possessed a dry wit that caught him off guard. When she spoke of her homeworld's crystal forests and floating cities, her eyes lit up with such longing that Kai felt an unexpected ache in his chest. On the 4th day, everything changed. "I was not always a prisoner," Thessa said quietly, watching Kai's face as he processed her words. 3 months ago, I was part of a diplomatic envoy sent to negotiate peace with your colonial council." Kai's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "That's impossible. No Valeth diplomats have what, Sergeant? Been reported? Been acknowledged?" Her violet eyes held his with startling intensity. "What if I told you that your own people betrayed those negotiations? That someone in your command structure wanted this war to continue?" The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The convenient timing of Thessa's capture, just as reports emerged of her supposed crimes. The rushed execution order. The lack of any concrete evidence beyond testimony from sources he'd never been allowed to interview. The attacks on the supply convoys, he began, were carried out by extremists who opposed our peace efforts. Thessa finished. "My own people, Sergeant. They branded me a traitor for seeking compromise with humans, then fed me to your forces as a scapegoat. Your commanders were happy to accept a convenient villain." That night, Kai accessed classified files he had no business reading, using security clearances he wasn't supposed to have. What he found made his blood run cold. Buried in encrypted communications were references to maintaining colonial interests and preventing premature peace negotiations. There were orders to discredit any Valeth peace overtures and to use Thessa's capture as propaganda to justify expanded military operations. She hadn't been lying. She was exactly what she claimed to be, a diplomat trying to save both their peoples from a senseless war. When he returned to the interrogation room the next morning, Thessa took one look at his face and nodded knowingly. "You found it," she said simply. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me?" She leaned forward slightly, and Kai caught that cinnamon ozone scent again, suddenly aware of how the morning light brought out silver flecks in her eyes. "Sometimes, Sergeant, truth must be discovered rather than simply heard." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling between them. Then Thessa did something that changed everything. She reached across the table and gently touched his hand. Her skin was warm, surprisingly soft, and the contact sent an electric jolt through Kai's entire being. Not just physical attraction, though that was certainly present, but something deeper. Recognition. As if some part of him had been waiting his entire life for exactly this moment. This woman. This impossible connection across the divide of species and circumstance. Kai, she said, using his first name for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? He turned his hand palm up, fingers intertwining with hers. The neural dampening cuffs were cold against his wrist, but her touch burned. Through everything else. I don't know, he admitted. But I won't let them kill you. Not for something you didn't do. Not when you were trying to save lives. Thessa's smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. Then perhaps there is hope after all. As their eyes met across the table, Kai realized that somewhere in the past week, his mission had fundamentally changed. He was no longer a sergeant, following orders. He was a man who'd found something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve, even if it meant betraying everything he'd sworn to defend. The ventilation system in Cell Block D hummed with a rhythm that had become as familiar to Kai as his own heartbeat. 2 weeks had passed since he'd uncovered the truth about Thessa's identity, and each day brought them closer to her scheduled execution. More importantly, each day brought them closer to each other. Their conversations had evolved beyond diplomacy and war crimes. In the quiet hours when his shifts ended, Kai found reasons to patrol the detention level, always stopping by her cell for what the logs would record as routine prisoner welfare checks. What actually happened was far from routine. Tell me about your family, Thessa asked one evening, sitting cross-legged on her cot while Kai leaned against the wall outside her cell, the energy barrier shimmering between them like heat waves. Not much to tell, he replied, but found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about growing up on a farming colony, about losing his parents to a mining accident, about joining the military because he'd had nowhere else to go. What about you? Thessa's expression grew wistful. I had a sister, Vera. She was an artist, created these incredible light sculptures that could make you cry just by looking at them. Her voice caught slightly. She died in one of the early bombing raids, before I became involved in the peace movement. I'm sorry. She would have liked you, I think, Thessa said, meeting his gaze through the barrier. She always said that kindness was the rarest form of strength. These moments of vulnerability were drawing them together in ways that defied military protocol, species barriers, and basic common sense. Kai found himself thinking about her constantly, the way she tilted her head when considering a complex question, how her eyes changed color depending on her mood, the graceful way she moved even in the confined space of her cell. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night during the station's sleep cycle. Kai had arrived for his usual patrol to find Thessa standing at the small window in her cell, staring out at the stars. She wore the simple gray detention uniform, but somehow she made it look elegant. Kai, she said without turning around. Do you ever wonder what your life might have been like if you'd made different choices? He moved closer to the barrier, close enough that he could see the silver markings along her neck pulse gently with her heartbeat. Every day since I met you. She turned then, and the raw emotion in her violet eyes nearly undid him. This is impossible, isn't it? What we're feeling. Probably, he admitted. But I've never been good at following impossible rules. With deliberate precision, Kai accessed his security override and deactivated the cell's energy barrier. The eye shimmer vanished with a soft chime, leaving nothing between them but air and the weight of their choices. Thessa stepped forward slowly, as if testing whether this was real. When she reached him, she lifted one hand to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw with infinite gentleness. Are you certain? She whispered. Instead of answering with words, Kai cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The contact was electric, sending shockwaves through every nerve ending. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like starlight and hope, and everything he'd been missing without knowing it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. For now, surveillance systems, Thessa murmured against his lips. I may have temporarily disabled them. Kai replied, pulling her closer. Amazing what a few crossed wires can do. Her laugh was like music, and when she kissed him again, it was with a passion that spoke of desperation and desire and the knowledge that their time was running out. They moved together to her cot, hands exploring, barriers falling away along with clothing and pretense and everything that had kept them apart. Making love to Thessa was unlike anything Kai had ever experienced. Her skin seemed to glow in the dim light, those silver markings becoming more pronounced as her arousal built. Every touch, every caress was returned with interest, and when she whispered his name in her own language, Kai-ish, which she later told him meant my heart's desire, he thought he might die from the intensity of it. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow cot, her head on his chest, his fingers combing through her dark hair. The reality of their situation pressed down on them like a physical weight. They'll kill me in 3 days, Thessa said quietly. No, Kai replied, his voice fierce with determination. They won't. She lifted her head to look at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that a peace envoy dying in custody would be a terrible tragedy, he said carefully. Especially if it happened during an unfortunate accident in the power core maintenance section. Understanding dawned in her eyes. That's treason, Kai. They'll hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. Let them. He pulled her up for another kiss, pouring all of his love and determination into the contact. You said you came here to build bridges between our peoples. Maybe it's time someone helped you finish the job. Thessa searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she smiled with fierce joy. Then we'd better start planning. As they whispered plans and contingencies into the dark hours of the station's night cycle, Kai realized that he'd finally found his purpose. Not as a soldier following orders, but as a man protecting the woman he loved and the future they might build together, even if that future lay beyond the reach of both their people's laws. The Nexus station power core hummed with barely contained energy, its cylindrical chamber extending 4 levels above and below the maintenance access point where Kai now stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 6 hours, Thessa would be transferred to the execution chamber. In 6 hours, if his plan failed, the galaxy would lose not just a remarkable woman, but perhaps its last hope for peace between humans and Valeth. His hands shook slightly as he attached the small explosive charges to the power coupling. Not enough to cause real damage, but sufficient to create the kind of spectacular electrical failure that would require immediate evacuation of the nearby detention blocks. The beauty of the plan lay in its simplicity. Prisoners would be moved to emergency holding areas during the crisis, and in the chaos, one particular prisoner might tragically be caught in a secondary explosion. At least, that's what the official reports would say. Reeves to command, he spoke into his comm unit, forcing his voice to remain steady. Beginning routine maintenance check on Power Core 7. Copy that, Sergeant. You're authorized for 40 minutes. 40 minutes to stage a death, steal a woman, and betray everything he'd sworn to protect. Kai had lived by military precision his entire adult life, but now he was operating on pure emotion and desperate hope. The first explosion was smaller than he'd anticipated, but the resulting power fluctuation sent alarms screaming throughout the station. Emergency lighting kicked in as sections of the detention level went dark, and Kai could hear the automated evacuation protocols activating. Perfect. He sprinted through maintenance corridors he'd memorized over the past week, emerging near Cell, Block D just as security teams were moving prisoners to temporary holding. In the confusion of emergency lighting and shouting guards, it was relatively easy to intercept the transport carrying Thessa. Power surge in Block D, he shouted to Lieutenant Torres, who was coordinating the evacuation. Prisoner 7 Alpha needs immediate medical attention. Possible neural shock from the cuff feedback. Torres barely glanced at Thessa's apparently unconscious form as Kai loaded her onto a medical gurney, Get her to sickbay level 3, and Reeves, make it quick. Command. Once all prisoners secured within the hour, the unconscious Thessa managed a barely perceptible wink as they entered the medical transport lift. Kai's dosing her with a mild sedative that would fool casual observation had been the riskiest part of the plan. Too little, and she might not appear genuinely unconscious; too much, and she might actually be harmed. Sickbay level 3 was deserted except for an automated medical droid, which Kai quickly deactivated. As the sedative wore off, Thessa sat up slowly, her eyes focusing on his face with growing awareness. Phase 1 complete, she said, attempting a smile. Though I have to say, your bedside manner needs work. Despite everything, Kai found himself grinning. Even facing certain death if they were caught, she could make him smile. Phase 2 might be worse. We need to get you dead. The medical bay's cremation unit was designed for biological waste disposal, but it would serve their purposes perfectly. Using tissue samples Kai had collected from the morgue, they created convincing remains that would pass a cursory DNA scan. Meanwhile, Thessa used the medical fabrication unit to create synthetic skin patches that would disguise her distinctive silver markings. How do I look? She asked, having changed into a maintenance worker's uniform. Like someone I've never seen before, Kai replied, though the camouflage couldn't hide the intelligence in her eyes or the graceful way she moved. Ready for the performance of a lifetime? The second explosion was larger, more dramatic, a staged accident that would explain the tragic death of their high-value prisoner. As fire suppression systems activated and emergency teams rushed to contain the damage, Kai transmitted his final report. Command, this is Reeves. Prisoner 7 Alpha has been caught in the secondary explosion. I'm reading complete biological system failure. Shall I begin disposal protocols? Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm, tight with frustration. Damn it, Sergeant. Command wanted her alive for public execution. Clean up the mess and file a full report. Yes, sir. Reeves out. As they moved through service corridors toward the docking bay, Thessa caught his arm. There's no going back from this, Kai. Once we leave, you can never return to your life. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Even disguised, even in the dim emergency lighting, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. More than that, she was hope incarnate, proof that understanding could bridge any divide. My life began the day you arrived on this station, he said simply. Everything before that was just marking time. Her smile was radiant, and when she kissed him, it tasted like freedom and starlight, and the promise of tomorrow. The small cargo transport he'd procured through carefully manipulated supply requisitions was exactly where he'd hidden it, Bay 94, tucked between legitimate freight haulers and marked as undergoing routine maintenance. As they settled into the pilot and co-pilot seats, Kai's hands moved automatically through the pre-flight sequence he'd practiced 1,000 times in simulation. Where are we going? Thessa asked, strapping herself in. Neutral space. There's a trade station called Haven's Rest about 6 jumps from here. From there, he shrugged as the engines came online. From there we figure out how to save the galaxy. No pressure, she said with a laugh. As their small ship slipped away from Nexus station, just another cargo hauler heading out on routine delivery, Kai felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete certainty. He'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Behind them, emergency teams were still fighting fires and filing reports about the tragic death of their most wanted prisoner. Ahead lay the vast unknown of space and the possibility of peace, and beside him sat the woman who'd shown him that sometimes love really could conquer all. 6 months later, the small apartment above Kelso's cantina on Haven's Rest had become more than just a hiding place. It was home. Kai stood at the wide viewport that served as their living room window, watching cargo ships dock and depart from the neutral station while morning light from the local star painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Behind him, he could hear Thessa moving around their kitchenette, humming a Velith melody that always made his chest tighten with emotion. The Council of Independent Worlds wants to meet next week, she said, sliding her arms around his waist. From behind and pressing her cheek against his shoulder blade, Representative Voss believes they're ready to hear our proposal. Kai leaned back into her embrace, marveling as he did every day at how perfectly they fit together. All of them? Even the Centauri Confederation? Especially the Centauri, Thessa replied. They've been losing ships to the war zones for months. Peace is starting to look more profitable than neutrality. The past 6 months had been a delicate balance of hiding and revealing, staying hidden from colonial authority and Veleth military forces, while carefully building a network of allies who could help them expose the truth. Thessa had proven remarkably adept at interspecies diplomacy, while Kai's military background helped him identify which officials might be trustworthy versus those who would sell them out for the right price. Their relationship had deepened in ways Kai hadn't thought possible. Living together, working together, facing constant danger together, it should have driven them apart. Instead, each challenge had only made their bond stronger. Thessa could calm him with a touch when his military training made him want to solve problems with force, while he could ground her diplomatic optimism when the weight of their mission threatened to overwhelm her. There's something else, Thessa said, her voice carrying a note of excitement and nervousness that made Kai turn in her arms to face her. I received a coded transmission from the Veleth resistance, the real resistance, not the extremists who betrayed me. They want to meet. Kai's jaw tightened with protective instincts. It could be a trap. It could be, she agreed. But Kai, they're led by my cousin Dex. He was part of the original peace faction before everything went wrong. If we can unite the Veleth moderates with the Independent Worlds Coalition, we might actually have enough political weight to force both sides to the negotiating table. Kai finished, seeing the possibilities. Where's the meeting? Talaris Prime. It's a medical research station in the DMZ, technically neutral, but close enough to Veleth space that Dex's people can reach it safely. She searched his face with those changing violet eyes. We'd be walking into the heart of contested space, Kai. If either military finds us, then we'd better not get caught, he said, pulling her closer for a kiss that tasted like morning, tea, and determination. The journey to Talaris Prime took them through 3 different smuggling routes and 2 identity changes, but they arrived safely at the pristine medical station orbiting a garden world that had somehow escaped the devastation of war. Dex turned out to be everything Thessa had promised: thoughtful, passionate about peace, and possessed of a strategic mind that complemented his cousin's diplomatic skills perfectly. The moderates control nearly 40% of the Veleth fleet, he explained during their first meeting, his own silver markings flickering with excitement. We've been waiting for the right moment to break with the extremist leadership, with Thessa's survival as proof of their betrayal. You can justify a complete change in leadership, Kai said, following the political implications. And the first act of the new government would be opening peace negotiations. Exactly. Dex turned to his cousin. But we need something more than just your testimony, Thessa. We need evidence, documents, proof that the extremists collaborated with human hardliners to maintain the war, which led to their most dangerous mission yet: infiltrating a colonial authority intelligence facility to retrieve the encrypted communications Kai had discovered months earlier. Using their knowledge of military protocols and Thessa's growing network of allies, they managed to extract not just the files they needed, but comprehensive evidence of war profiteering on both sides. The revelation that military contractors and resource extraction corporations had been deliberately prolonging the conflict for profit sent shockwaves through both human and Veleth space. Within weeks, moderate factions on both sides were calling for immediate peace negotiations, while extremist leaders found themselves facing everything from courts-martial to outright revolution. Look at this, Thessa said one evening, showing Kai a news feed on her tablet. They were back on Haven's Rest, preparing for what might be their final mission, serving as neutral facilitators at the upcoming peace summit. The Colonial Assembly just voted to recall the Nexus fleet. And listen to this quote from the new Veleth Prime Minister: "It is time to honor those who sought peace instead of punishing them for their wisdom." Kai took the tablet, scanning the articles with growing amazement. After so many months of careful work and constant danger, It seemed almost impossible that their efforts were actually succeeding. "Think it'll stick?" he asked. "I think," Thessa said, moving to straddle his lap in their favorite chair, "that we've given both sides something more valuable than victory. We've given them hope." She was right, Kai realized as he lost himself in her kiss. Somewhere along the way, their desperate escape had become something larger, a symbol that understanding was possible, that love could bridge any divide, that peace was worth fighting for. When the formal peace treaty was signed 3 months later, it included a provision establishing the Reeves-Veltar Institute for Interspecies Understanding, funded jointly by human and Velith governments. The Institute's first project would be documenting the true history of the war and the cover-up that had nearly destroyed both civilizations. "Ready for respectability?" Kai asked as they prepared to attend the treaty signing ceremony on New Geneva. Thessa adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform and smiled. "As ready as a former alien criminal and her traitorous human lover can be." "That's former peace envoy and her brilliant human partner," he corrected, earning a laugh that still made his heart skip beats. As their ship approached the gleaming diplomatic station where representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness the end of the war, Kai reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he'd been a soldier following orders. Now he was half of a partnership that had literally changed the galaxy. "No regrets?" Thessa asked, taking his hand as they prepared to dock. Kai brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Only that it took a war to bring us together." "Well," she said with that radiant smile that had captured his heart in a detention cell on Nexus Station, "we'll just have to make sure the peace is worth it." As they walked together toward a future they'd fought to create, Kai knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had everything else, together, united by a love that had literally moved worlds and a shared conviction that hope was always worth fighting for. The galaxy had learned to see beyond the surface, to recognize that sometimes the greatest truths were hidden behind the most unlikely facades. And in a universe where an alien criminal and her traitorous human lover had become symbols of peace, anything seemed possible.